Agencies need to work with each other in public sector, and without APIs, it's like snail mail. Another way to look at it is like the different government offices are like kids who don't always share their toys, and APIs are like the rule book that helps them play nicely. It lets the tax office talk to social services so they can share info securely and get stuff done way faster.
You're one of the only innovations I've come across that's secure as much as it modernizes.
There's not a lot of potential to proactively secure your API transactions and conversations. There's a lot of reactive stuff like GitHub. Hey, we found a key in your code, blah, blah, blah. This is proactive.
All right, y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Ever to Conquer pod, where we take kind of an unfiltered look at public sector technology on the mission to accelerate and modernize public sector data. I am incredibly excited about this particular episode for a lot of reasons. It's going to touch on the art of the possible that we like to uncover, looking at kind of the frontier and seeing where things are going from a leadership perspective, but also from a technical perspective. And our guests today, I think, are going to bring a lot of fun content. They have a long history of innovation. They're also doing some groundbreaking work that I am super excited about. I think I'll know if former Florida House Speaker Chris Sprowls listens to this episode, because we're going to spend a lot of time today on APIs. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because for a decade in the legislature, trying to work on technology policy to take Florida kind of from a stone age to a future state. An API economy is so critical to how that works. So just understanding APIs and what they do, we'll touch on that a little bit today, because I think some of our guests are probably like, I've heard the term, I know it's out there, why does it matter? But we're also going to get into a pretty technical future state of what kind of, I like to think of, next-gen APIs look like. So without any further ado, Nate Burch, great to have you here. Nate, I want to start with you for a second. Maybe just introduce yourself to our audience, a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of move into today's content.
Yeah, I'm Nate McKervey. I was studying physics, but fell in love with data while working at Harris Corporation for a lot of years, and then ended up moving over to Splunk, a big data company, for a decade before realizing this API problem that exists and starting a company with a bunch of fellow longtime Splunkers.
Awesome. Burch, I can't ask you to introduce yourself without failing to say that you are the Prince of Puns. We appreciate good puns.
Yeah, that is my official job title.
I love that. I never had Prince of Puns, but I did have junk drawer and Swiss Army knife on business cards at one point. It just depended on the day. Firefighter. Yeah. Talk to us. What are you doing at Subkeys, Burch? Give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I computer science guy, but realized that I wanted to do a little more social element, so ended up going for the MBA. Worked at a bunch of enterprises, and I really just locked in on the fact that, like, as humans, like, we don't need to be making mistakes doing things that we can just have computers do, and we can move up in the value that we add. And that's actually how I ended up at Splunk, is because of the ability to really just see the data without trying to mess with it. And that type of observability made it really exciting for me when I came over to Subkeys and learning about all of the new visibility and control that just never existed before. That was a very exciting opportunity. So
I love the theme there. Nate, if you were to describe Subkeys' mission in a sentence or less to kind of set the stage, and then I want to get into APIs and kind of walk our audience through it, but how would you describe the Subkeys' mission for somebody that has never heard of you and doesn't, maybe not even heard of Splunk, right? There's some folks listening to this that are interested in the policy side, and obviously industry knows Splunk really, really well and the ride y'all went on, but how would you describe that mission?
Yeah, I mean, APIs are powering so many things behind the scenes that we're not even totally aware of all the things they're powering. But the mission is really to bring visibility and control to all third-party API consumption. And I imagine a future where APIs are just way safer and easier to consume And eventually we'll get to the point where people will be frowning upon using real API keys because of the dangers of exposing a real API key versus a virtual key.
So let's break this down. Beverly Grant is a saint. I give this disclaimer all the time. My 80-year-old mother is the greatest mom ever. But my brother, who's a trial lawyer, would always say before he tried a homicide case, he gave his closing argument to our mom. And if she didn't understand it to get to the verdict, then he went back to the drawing board.
Wait, are we going to have a special guest and have her come in?
I was about to say, she's like the greatest soundboard because she's so curious and asks all the questions. But I like to say the thing in the tech space. She asked me when I took the CIO job and then when we launched RedLeif, she's like, I don't even understand what you do. Like my friends ask me, what is Jamie doing? And I'm like, tech. Nate, what is an API? Like if you were to simplify an API before we even get to a key, an application program interface, how would you explain that to my mom if we were sitting at dinner?
Yeah. So like I said, you may not know what an API is, but you're probably using one. Every time you do something like search for a flight, you're hitting APIs. I think I heard a statistic, the average app on your phone uses 38 different APIs. Last night I went to dinner with my wife. It was our anniversary, our 13th anniversary. And if there were a good analogy, it's actually the waiter is like an API. So imagine you're at a restaurant, you want some food. You don't go to the kitchen and make the food yourself. You tell the waiter what you want. The waiter understands your request, goes to the kitchen, that's the system, and then brings back your food, the data or the service. You don't need to know how the kitchen works. You just know what to ask for. There's a menu that you look at of what you can ask for, and the waiter handles it. And so that's what an API is. It's like the waiter. It's a way for different programs or applications to talk to each other.
I'll add, Nate, to
Burch.
that example. That's a really good example, too, because everyone knows how to interact with a server. And so the server sort of handles the quirks or complexities.
We just had our first pun. We just had our first pun, and I had to call it out. Burch, you can start over, but talk to us about servers and servers, please.
Yes. Well, now that I've got you all served. No, so, like, if you think about it, different kitchens have different cultures, have different ways that they run in, with doors, whatever. But the server obscures that for us. So just like that, the actual, well, it's confusing to have server as two different roles here. In technology, the stuff going on behind the scenes that we would call a server is that all complexity is ignored by the fact that we create this interface that can be known and recognized and used by people in a more common way.
I love it. And I think like on the pun and on the analogy a little bit, like we have to have somebody to go make sense of that complexity, or we have to understand the full complexity, right? Like there's only two choices. Like I have to have a server that can go do that, or I have to understand how that server actually works. I love that example. I tried so hard in the legislature and just beat my head against a wall to try and explain it. The two that I used, one was the little transport thing at the bank, right? Like you pull up at the ATM and I want to access my information at the bank I use, but I presumably shouldn't have access to all the information. And so the permissions and the service that happens there by me submitting, my debit card or my account information to get that information back. The other one that kind of made some sense to people. Like I should be able to access my records at the bank, but I shouldn't be able to access your accounts at the bank. And so the segmentation. The dinner party is the other one I love. And Nate, I think it kind of goes where you were going, but like, I think this is important to click on here for a second. What APIs opened up? Because I think that gets lost, right? When the API economy kind of took off, 15 or so years ago now, and really started the inertia. Prior to that, if we thought about like two software companies wanting to interact, it was like if I owned my house and I wanted to have a dinner party and I wanted to invite you over to my house for the dinner party, pre-API, I basically had to let you into my whole house, right? Once I gave you the key to open the door, I had to let you into the whole house. And APIs started to say, well, like, wait a minute, I might not want you to have access to certain parts of my house. And so I can permissively allow you in. Whether that's a good analogy or not, it sets us up for keys. So Nate, you talked about, and Burch, you talked about kind of the server construct of both the service and the translation and the simplification. Talk to us now about how an API works in the way of a key. Because in the house example, or even in the data center example, to access the server, what does the key do with an API that is relevant to the work y'all are doing?
Yeah, I like the house example because like once you're in the house, there's a ton of things you can go do. You can go use the TV, you can go use the tools in the garage. There's a bunch of stuff you can do.
Or the toilet. You had to have 3 T's.
Yeah. And those are all like functions of an API. And APIs, like you said, they're built to do one thing really well. So you may have an API for a certain type of service. So going to the toilet is really good for flushing things. But anyway, you might not want someone to just walk in and be able to use everything in your house or go into your vault, even if you have like a safe. And so the way APIs are accessed are with these keys, and you get a key and you can enter. But a lot of times these keys are overprivileged or over-permissioned, and you had no visibility into when somebody uses the key. It's kind of like if you have a handy person or a guest and you give them a copy of the key to your house, they can get in and you don't know if they make another copy of the key or when they use it. So what virtual keys do is they virtualize those keys, kind of like a virtual credit card. You can set spend limits and stuff, but keeping with the virtual key versus physical key analogy, you can basically upgrade your house to have a smart lock. And with that smart lock, you give codes to people and you can set restrictions like what times they can enter. You get visibility. You can see a log of when they attempted to enter, when they did enter, and you can dynamically change these policies and rotate them out. And that simply doesn't exist across the board for APIs. Every API is different. It's a snowflake. It gives you different capabilities. And virtual keys that let you have basically you upgrade your keys to be smart keys, like smart locks.
So Burch, yeah, go ahead, weigh in. But I also want you to explain what a key looks like in terms that people would understand, like the physical key to that, right? Like it's almost like giving your system's social security number away or your system's password away. But Burch, come with where you were going first.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to add on to that. I didn't know if you mentioned, because you now have all of that control, you also have all that visibility, right? And just like with that smart lock, you can see when, someone entered the house. But yeah, so talking about what keys look like. They're arbitrary text strings. Yeah. They're like, it's a little bit shocking, for all of the technology that we have, that, there's different types of authentication and different types of keys, but for the most part, they're just flat text in as much that it's very easy to lose or very easy to copy and paste it to someone or misplace.
Yeah, think of a physical key. If you just get the right notches and a physical key, that's all you need to unlock a door. Well, that's exactly what an API key is, but it's just text. And if you get the right text, you can unlock that door. And the problem is you don't know if it's being copied. You don't get the visibility. And imagine that you've finally figured out, a physical key did leak and it's out there. People can now get in my house. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to go change all the door locks. How hard is that? That's not fun to go change all your door locks and reissue all the keys. If you have virtual keys, that problem is so much simpler. You don't have to go change all the door locks. You simply rotate the virtual key.
You never call a locksmith again.
So I love where y'all are going to make it pragmatic for some of our folks. I can't help but laugh. Anybody who's ever been through kind of a crazy breakup and you have physical keys means calling the locksmith and changing all the doors. If you had a smart lock, you could just revoke access to that one thing without, and this I think is really important. It's both sides. I can prohibit the one person that I don't want ever entering the premises again from being able to enter the premise without impacting all of my friends who had a different key that I still wanted to enter the premise.
Yeah.
And I think if we think about where the status quo is today in an API economy, APIs are everywhere. And once we've issued that text, we don't typically have a way to refresh that text without having to go on this big old, it's like an unplug mission. It's like suspending your credit card to figure out what you miss, except in this case, like really sensitive transactions are happening. If I revoke or update an API key, Nate, if you were to sum up for folks on this, what does the quick high-level process of an agreement between the two parties, the kitchen and you and your wife, look like with that static text? So if the kitchen says we'd like to serve you, give us just real quick high level what it looks like for an API integration to happen.
I actually want to dive into this with a couple analogies. Like today, if you realize an API key is leaked, you have to do something about it. You have to decide how fast you want to act. If that key is used for a lot of critical services, you have to decide, do I want to accept the risk of the vulnerability that's out there, or do I want to like disable that key right away and break maybe critical services?
Yes.
Somebody has to make that call, and that's really scary. The virtual credit card, if you used a virtual credit card for different purchases, like your electric bill gets one and your phone bill gets another, and you see somebody purchases shoes with your phone bill, all you have to do is rotate that one phone bill. You don't have to mess with your electric and everything else. That's what the virtual keys does that for you too. So you issue virtual keys for every user system device, and if there's a compromise, you don't have to replace all the door locks in your house. You simply rotate that one code, and you disrupt only the people that had that one code. And that's the same with virtual keys. It's so much less disruptive. You can make that decision quicker on how am I going to secure us versus not break critical services.
I want to add to that, when you're talking about the risk effort balance that goes in when a key is exposed or needs to be changed, through a lot of conversations that we've had with practitioners, it's become clear that a disturbing amount of time the key is not rotated when it should be, but the effort is just too much.
Yeah. Quick example that a large U.S. exchange, when we talked to them about this, they said, we had to audit code for 6 months before we could rotate a key because it could have had such disastrous consequences.
And I think that's it's super easy. It's why I love so much what y'all are introducing. There's the security side, and then there's the modernization side. Virtual API keys sit like squarely in the middle. I've talked a lot about how, as a CIO, I kind of view my CISO as a defensive coordinator there to keep points off the board and not let the Russians and the Chinese and, defend against the CCP, the Kremlin, and the nation states and ATPs. Similarly, APIs are this insane catalyst to prevent me from having to build ground up all functionalities, allows the integration economy to happen, significantly brings down costs, lets me service my constituents way better. And the API kind of sits as the central piece to make that happen. And right now, I think we have too many people that have to decide between unplug it for security purposes, and by doing that, unplug modernization transformation initiatives, or that have to accept the security vulnerabilities in the name of letting the offensive coordinator score points and put points on the board. Where I think there's this beautiful nexus to say, you shouldn't have to settle for either. There's a way to manage your API environment. There's a way to virtualize keys. There's a way to support your CISO while also letting your chief technology officer or chief data officer run wild with secure modernization faster than kind of ever been there.
I want to add on, when we were talking a moment ago about the keys and people not actually changing them, if anyone is not technical and listening to this, awesome that you made it this far. But number two, you should be concerned. You should be going to your technical partners and saying, we really should rethink this. To me, it's a no-brainer. Why, there's key vaults and stuff, but still everyone is sharing the same key.
I'm going to take us on a curveball that just hit me. Curveball that
I was feeling a little batty.
Maybe one last thing about this. There's this great connection between the CISO and the CIO now with these virtual keys. They both have, it's kind of like offense and defense, like you said. The CISO needs to protect, but the CIO, they got to keep the business or the organization running. And it's rare when there's a solution that both improves the user experience and its security. Like single sign-on was one of those.
Yep.
And I think virtual keys are the same because security gets way better visibility into the risks and can mitigate and resolve them much quicker. But then the IT side of the house, the operations, gets more visibility into where their errors are or where they're spending money on APIs and they shouldn't be. And yeah.
There's not a lot of potential to proactively secure your API transactions and conversations. There's a lot of reactive stuff like GitHub. Hey, we found a key in your code, blah, blah, blah. This is proactive.
100%. I love where you're going with that. And now I'm going to take us on a curveball.
Okay, brace.
It just kind of hit me. Obviously,
Nice pun there.
Burch is contagious. I told you we love a good fun. So it just kind of hit me. Having spent a lot of time trying to kind of write the diplomatic version of the Doge playbook back in 2014, 15, 16, like, hey, we want a data catalog. We want to know what we have, where we keep it, who owns it, what happens, and then getting suckered into being the CIO for a few years and realizing all the reasons that certain people want to obstruct that and don't want to do. Like, one of the biggest barriers, if not the biggest barrier or opponent to public sector technology is do nothing. Like, it's not actually your competitor that has a different solution. It's actually just like, how do I compel people to do something? And I think, one of the things that like fascinates me about the work y'all are doing is that it gets over the hurdle of integration is risky. Because that's, in the public sector, if you're losing the war of the one sentence, you're losing. And now you look at what's happening at Doge. And I think that something that just hit me, not a secret, they're going into federal agencies saying cut IT spend by 70%. I have been very vocal, and I'm willing to make a big bet that will be a net increase in software spend. Who's going to pay the price for that do y'all know what an SI is?
Services integrator.
We call them software inhibitors on this show because what they actually want to war against is automation. Their entire model in most situations, the egregious ones, and why I thought about Doge is like they've been calling out left and right. GSA blacklisted effectively 10 firms that are the most egregious, and they're continuing to pull the thread back on this. But the software companies all the time get told by these big SIs, hey, we're only interested in working with you if we can do services around it. And if it doesn't need services, then you don't really help our core business, and so we don't want to include you in the bid. So if we come full circle, like, I actually think the work you're doing is Doge's best friend. Because if we're able to show the world, hey, I don't have to custom build, like you can go down the boondoggle projects in Florida, former budget chief, Joanne Lesnoff, who's a savage and just awesome. When I got appointed, she presented to the House committee and said, basically identified $500 million that had been wasted on the exact same time and materials boondoggles that were, kind of the corporate oligarchy wins and says, well, we need to build you a custom system from the ground up. APIs are, I took a lot of bullets in trying to say, like, we don't need to build a custom system. We just need to have an API catalog that we securely manage to say we can leverage this existing function over here rather than building from the ground up a custom application. I don't know what my question is.
I can put a button on that.
Yes, Burch, bail me out, because I think you're doing something even so much bigger than that intersection of CIO and CISO and actually supporting a fundamental transformation of how the public sector funds technology projects and gets away from these boondoggles.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Well, that was quite the lead up there. I think what's really interesting is when you talk about like all these custom projects, it's all these like, okay, we want to build it just for these services. We want to, it's very bespoke. What is so beautiful and elegant about our solution to me is that it's simple and it works across all APIs. So it's not like, oh, that won't work for us. It's all just at the HTTP layer, and that universal aspect to me is like a revolution. We're now giving the people the visibility and control without limiting them to, we're going to build you a bespoke solution.
Nate, did you have something you wanted to add? Because I want to
Yeah.
elevate it up a hair from the solution to the function. I want to focus on the function here for a second.
Right.
But Nate, you
So,
looked like
yeah, I mean, agencies need to work with each other in public sector, and without APIs, it's like snail mail. It's like paperwork and documents you're mailing. Imagine if the waiter to go from your table to the
You have to mail your
kitchen,
order.
like,
imagine if they had to go to the farm.
yeah,
Imagine if they had to go to the farm and actually like pick the produce and slaughter the cow.
Yeah, and APIs just greatly simplify it. It makes it go way faster. So like it's kind of, another way to look at it is like the different government offices are like kids who don't always share their toys, and APIs are like the rule book that helps them play nicely. It lets the tax office talk to social services so they can share info securely and get stuff done way faster. And a specific example of that, a friend of mine works at the Department of run the API at the Department of Veteran Affairs, and they built an API to share data, and they're doing really cool stuff. Like they allow it allows for secure data exchange between veterans and third-party organizations. So an example of this is the iPhone app, the health app. Patients can like receive their can share and receive their information like allergies, conditions, immunization, lab results, medications, all through this. And what's happened now is, actually, this was years ago. The data is probably much more, but shortly after the API launched, it removed a ton of heavy paperwork, and digital submissions took over like 5% of the veterans sent claims like shortly after its implementation. And that's just one example. Like if you start using these APIs, you can get massive efficiencies.
I love where you're going. That is really tempting because you're taking me back to my early days in software. Our platform was really a stack of APIs, but the Blue Button initiative at VA was one of the first prominent examples of what the API could do, and also showed the importance of why you need the rest of the community. So my Veterans Affairs, my veteran who got their healthcare through the VA, could download from Blue Button by way of APIs their record at the VA. As soon as they went outside the VA, they had limitations, right? Because now I have multiple source files. I say that to say, especially in the public sector, where you have these government agencies that do serve constituents and are trying to figure out how to improve the constituent experience, their choice is either to like literally go find a field, buy a field, plant the vegetables. Like that's their version of serving dinner. An API says, hey, in order to serve, an API economy would suggest, in order to serve Nate and his wife at dinner, I need to make a call to my source of, beef. I need to get my vegetables. I have the ability to have these multiple APIs so that I can serve you immediately.
Yeah, you just made me realize APIs are like Uber Eats.
Yes, like we live. This is why I've been so excited for this conversation. Like we live in an API economy, and I think when we think about whether or not somebody is open sourced or closed sourced, like the API is such a beautiful example that says like, don't show me what your philosophy is, show me your behavior, and I will tell you your philosophy. So the most closed stack ecosystem that says, hey, we'll finally publish some APIs, it's really because they got market pressure. They don't believe in like actually open sourcing. Everything on our phones, Nate, everything we use that we say, boy, that was a modern experience, is almost exclusively fundamentally built on an open API. And I don't mean true open source, but an open source philosophy. It's why even in the GPT world right now, like, open's gonna win. It's just a matter of time. I don't know if you think I'm crazy, but I am a zealot on open architecture and API economy, because for you to get a delightful experience at that dinner table last night, that restaurant has the metaphor of a bunch of different APIs that are how you make a reservation, different function. How they seat you, different function. How they source their food, different function. How they order their food, different function. But they have a operational framework that allows those metaphorical API calls to happen in a way that you don't need to understand all that stuff. You just say, boy, yummy.
Going back to your analogy, like let's say you've got a farm and you walk up to that farm and you're hungry. You have to figure out what am I going to eat? How am I going to eat it? How am I going to put it all together? And you have to go pick all that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas you go to a restaurant, they give you a menu, and that menu is the docs. It's the open API spec. It's like the spec file of like what you can do, and you don't have to go figure it all out. You just call that item on the menu.
Yeah, and I think so. If we transition, because I don't want to get to the scary part first, but we're gonna do some current event stuff that's timely with this recording. I look at it as a former. My friends would joke I was like a quasi or doo-doo agency head because I wasn't technically an agency head. I sit inside an agency. It was a zoo. That job is set up for failure, and unfortunately, the legislature is trying to fix it. But they do that every 4 or 5 years. So one of the things I would have been interested, and Nate, this might be an interesting thing to kind of how we met. We met when I was in the chair as the CIO. You reached out cold to me and just said, "Hi, my name is Nate, and these are some of the things we do, and I'd love to show you some cool stuff we're doing." Talk a little bit real quick about what you were doing and where we tried to kind of go like, "Hey, this is really cool." Also, you're like in the 21st century, and I'm dealing with 14th century monks in the government ecosystem as far as kind of what we're ready to deploy. But I'd love for you to touch on, Nate, how our relationship started, because we do have people in this community that are trying to access government, and they kind of feel like they can only go, they're told like, you have to hire the right lobbyist, you have to have the right relationship, you have all this stuff that sometimes is unfortunately all too real. But quickly tell the audience how we met, because I think that's kind of an interesting little segue into kind of where your transition to Subkeys went.
Yeah, just to go a little bit further back, like when I went to work for Splunk in the beginning, I was their first TSSCI professional services person. So I did a lot of work in the government, and I had this inaccurate.
Will you translate, TSSCI for our folks who don't know?
Yeah, that's
an acronym.
Top secret. It's top secret security clearance.
Yeah.
So basically, there were some jobs that I was only a person allowed to do some of the jobs. So I got to like go a lot of different areas in the government. And from the outside looking in, I was like, oh, that's scary. People are going to be, I don't know, tough or mean or like hard to talk to. And then when I actually went in and was working with people, I'm like, no, everybody's just humans. It's just humans. And I think that's one reason why I was like, just reach out to people if you want to talk to them, especially if you want to learn like how their world works today. Like, what are the problems you have today? People usually want to talk about them. And I think that's how our relationship started, was like, hey, what's going on in the state? And I think you were the first person in that role to ever say, there were all sorts of audits that would be asked for, but I think you were the first one to say, I want an API audit. I want to know like what APIs we were doing. And I think that's that should be a standard thing probably that people audit, because that's where a lot of like really important information is traversing, but also it's really the like backbone of the infrastructure. And if bad things are happening there, it's the window into what's really going on, good or bad.
I couldn't agree more. It's why I tell people that are trying to play in this space, like, you don't have to have a technical background. You have to be curious. You have to want to learn, and you have to understand it starts with a single data element. And if I just do the curious game of like, now what, then what, why not, all the way back to that single data element, I start to discover my APIs. I start to discover my applications. I find networks I didn't know exist. It's really, I mean, Burch kind of touched on it at the beginning. It's a visibility game, whether APIs or otherwise. Like the role of a technology executive is first and foremost, in my opinion, visibility. Because if we have visibility, now you can bring your friends to build a strategy with the kind of the known. The problem is there's just like a tiny fraction of visibility, especially in the public sector, and it makes it really difficult to advance progress.
Yeah. Most people the way people get visibility into stuff that's not good and with APIs is when something goes really bad.
Yeah.
Like one of the companies I was at previously, an engineer turned on some extra logging and APIs, and we got a $40,000 overage that month.
Yeah.
And another company I worked at, a previous employee that hadn't worked there anymore, one of his keys leaked, and they spun up servers that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's when you figure out things have gone bad. But that's just an example of like how bad the visibility is. There's so little visibility until something really bad happens.
I think that's right. And Burch, if I came back over to you for a second, like the thing, one of the slides I would use in our early all hands decks when I was trying to set the culture of the digital service was, would they choose to do business with us if they had a choice? And I think that's one of the things about the public sector that is uniquely challenging, is that we can force you to engage with the tax collector to get your driver's license, the DMV, or we can force you to do the guns and badges and fines have a remarkable way of, compelling you to complete a transaction. But what would it look like if I actually had an environment and a service delivery mindset and application that left a customer going like, man, that feels like Uber Eats experience, to use your example earlier, Nate, where like, I found what I want, it showed up, I'm happy. Why do I have to get a license tag in Florida? And I don't know if they've changed this or not. I'm not paying close enough attention, but like, boy, this was a war. Why do I have to go to the DMV? Like, why can't I order it on an app on my phone that says, I want this tag, I'm willing to pay this for the custom, or, the specialty tag, and it just shows up at my doorstep. I grab a screwdriver and I'm done. But those kind of examples across government that are easy to think of. I think the other one, and I want to touch on this for a second, Burch, and we didn't really prep this or call this out, but this is the other one that I think APIs are the solution to, and I think we're in the infancy. But for backstory here, one of my best friends, former business partner, he's still in the legislature because we kind of dragged him there. But when Lawrence McClure first got elected, he was on the eastern side of Hillsborough County in the Tampa area. I was on the western side. And a guy that's like one of my best friend's little brother, Jim Taylor, was he was like government affairs for Hillsborough County government. And inevitably, Lawrence and I would have something come up where we were just fuming. A constituent would call us, and it would be this egregious use case. And so Lawrence and I would kind of send Jim a text or call, be like, hey, man, the missiles are loaded. You got 72 hours. If this isn't resolved on behalf of this constituent, like, we're hitting launch, and your bosses at the county commission can answer for this egregious service level. And inevitably, Jim would go, hey, guys, we have a real problem. And it would uncover like this one use case. And then I would get this phone call. And I would get this phone call from somebody at the county that would start with, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the opportunity to help Nate and Burch with their issue. We are so thankful that you gave us the opportunity to do that. And I'm a pretty, I don't know if chill dude's the right word, but I don't have a temper. I don't get like, I'm excitable, but I don't have a temper. And this would make me so mad, because they were really saying, thank you for giving us the opportunity to do your job that nobody was paying attention to, and somebody was abusing a taxpayer. But because somebody in a position of power called us and said, take care of Nate and Burch's issue that I think is a misapplication of law, not asking for anything special, just saying, your law says this, why are you fining them, or why are you prohibiting them from opening their business, or what? And then all of a sudden, because my constituent knew me, or because they knew Lawrence, they got the answer they wanted. And it was like, what about Sally down the road that doesn't know a chairman in the legislature or doesn't have access to that? And so that's a long setup. But Burch,
I see where you're going.
The question is like on the constituent services of like the most vulnerable people. Like, how do we automate workflows? How do we digitize forms? How do we allow that data to travel so that nobody in like the disabled community, or nobody in the juvenile justice community, or the children in welfare's community, the foster home, like there's all these tragic use cases that happen every day because we're just not good enough in government. And a lot of times that's resources or authority or permission. We have the talent, but like we're losing all these individual use cases that APIs literally unleash the ability to say, we can serve people so much better, so much faster. Burch, I want to tee you up to go back to what you said.
Uh-oh.
Because you talked about it in a visibility and elevating what we do, which I fundamentally agree with. Also, what if you took that same approach to APIs and said, less administrative, more forward-facing customer service?
I don't know where to start, but I think that one of the really interesting things to me is like you're getting me fired up, like talking about that example with it's only because someone actually spoke up that this person was taken care of. But how many? I mean, it's like with API keys, like how do you even know if a bad actor has your key? There is no way to know if they're doing traffic from outside your network. So like, how are we okay with this?
Well, but I want to flip it the other way.
Yeah.
I want to flip it the other way. I think that's fair. We're gonna talk on the security side in a second. I want to point this squarely at the constituent services side that says, how can we possibly accurately service all of the constituents if we're not investing in APIs? Because now we have to go back to that farm analogy, Nate, to your point, maybe coming over to you if that's where you're going. Like the ability to build custom up a great customer experience from within government, I believe, is a complete fait accompli. It's impossible.
Yeah. I hate when I see, like, I have something that could help somebody, but I can't give them access. Like, we've seen it in our customer base where there's one organization that has access to an API and another org in the same company wants access. They're playing for the same team here. But since they have different cost centers, they say, no, we can't give you API access to that because we don't have visibility and control what you do with it. We don't want to give you an overprivileged key. I think this happens all the time. Like somebody wants to help and they literally can't because it's too risky for them to share their API key. That doesn't have to exist anymore. Now, like in the public sector, like you could say, I'm going to give you a virtual key and I'm going to restrict that key so you can't do harm.
And it's personalized. I think this is really important for people to understand. Like it is a one-of-one key in the example you're going down.
So Jamie, I'm going to give you a key later. And if you act maliciously or do things that you said you wouldn't, I'm going to know and I'm going to get alerted on it right away. And then I can revoke or restrict. But at least now we have a way to help each other.
Yep. I love where that's going because it gets back to that war of one sentence, whereas an agency head or a governor who doesn't understand how this stuff necessarily works, and they're like, how many times do we see governors and increasingly say, like, I want to modernize my government? And then they just get all of those aspirations, legitimate and genuine, get killed by the corporate oligarchy that wants to keep running these SI boondoggles. It gets killed by the folks who want to say, we have to do everything on-prem and we have to do everything custom and we have to own everything. Otherwise, the Chinese and the Russians will get it. And it's why I think it gets interesting to see like the next gen standard of an API be like, if it's not personalized and virtual and limited to the function, you're kind of committing malpractice. That malpractice looks two ways. One, you're significantly under-delivering what you could be delivering your constituents. Like the one thing about the public sector, the one thing that the public sector has that the private sector does not have is access to far more and significant data than the private sector does. What the private sector does is use their data exponentially more strategically and intelligently. All of the data exists in government to like fully revolutionize what modern government services look like. It's, in my opinion, just a matter of kind of creating the framework where we can securely modernize, which is what I think like a virtual API
Too many
key
people
does.
aren't allowed to order off the menus. There's tons of menus. There's tons of food.
And speaking of the
They
menu,
don't have
like,
access to the restaurant.
yeah, imagine coming into a single platform where all of this department, government, whatever hierarchy, all of the connections are there. And so you're picking and choosing. So that means if you wanted to do some kind of new development to modernize the public sector, you're not starting from scratch and trying to, get that connection. You can just share and then it's fully visible and accountable.
And I think that's what gets so interesting about the API function in general is that like I had this happen not too long ago with a very dear friend who kind of calls me from time to time and he's like, dude, I don't understand what's going on at my agency and why we're struggling with this and that. And he'll kind of bounce stuff off me and go like, hey, this is what I'm being told. Is this accurate? Is this what I'm being told? Is this accurate? And so they were specifically looking at workflow automation, like business process automation, which I think is like the lowest hanging fruit right now. And I'm noticing a trend in the public sector where people are starting to quit, like starting to stop, thinking about just big project and then have subset business process automation and starting to go like, wait a minute, how many forms do I have that my agency prints? And why am I spending $1 per page and X per printer and Y per processing? And why does Judith in accounting have like a vault she has to process rather than saying like, hey, how do I digitize the forms? Well, like that's only possible in an API economy. And so I love the API function to say, he and his team were looking at a couple different solutions and just like where things are going. And he goes like, my team was really impressed with this solution over here, but they know we can't afford it. And I said, well, what do you think the budget on that is? And he got the SI price. Like his team is so conditioned to paying SIs an extra zero for them to put a bunch of labor on it and build a blended rate rather than a software price. And it's crazy when you start thinking about like what people are confusing in the public sector as the cost of a project that is really a services business rather than thinking about the cost of software that automates. And that delta is extreme. And I think y'all are playing right in the middle of it.
Yeah, actually, and you bringing up SIs, like this technology has virtual keys gives the ability to hold the SIs accountable. Like
for sure.
I mean, when you
for sure. Keep going on this, Nate.
Right,
keep going.
Right. So, like, let's say your SI or service provider or somebody wants to help you out. They won the bid. They want to do something. Sometimes you have to give them keys to your system so they can do their work. They could rack up a lot of costs, and it could be very difficult to figure out where those costs are coming from, as well as how do you know that external organization hasn't leaked your keys? Yeah. What if you could grant access to your systems without ever giving them the actual API keys?
Yep.
That's what you can do with virtual keys, and you can give them fine-grained keys that you know who owns that key. And so you can invite them into an organization in the software, and you can see what they're doing, how much they're costing you. It seems like you've got something to say, Jamie.
No. So I think everything you just said is awesome. I also, with the most love and respect, I think you're underselling the way that you can keep these folks of it. And we don't want to do sales on this pod, so that was a poor pun. But I do think you're underselling the value in that and when we did the first year of reforms for the Florida Digital Service, and I was still in the legislature, and it was a 2-year plan of policy, and we were quite frankly just fed up with state technology being so poorly done. So people have heard me say it this way before, but it was like, well, we wrote that thing with like the state CIO will do this and this and this and this. And then it wasn't until that bill passed, the governor's office was like, hey, we want you to be the state CIO. And I was like, I would have written a very different bill if I would have known that this was coming, right? But year two, and this is where I was really ignorant and naive to just how broken kind of, and just the swamp, the oligarchy, whatever people want to put on it. We thought, hey, write the data catalog year one. Year two was always going to be the API catalog. To say, like, I need to know what data I have, and then I need to know what applications I have. Because now I have a chance to start getting the answers as a chairman of the legislature that I want to have answers to be able to fund where I want to fund, to punish the bad actors, to reward the good actors. But in the absence of the data catalog and the API catalog, I had no chance. And so everything, when we go back to like the Doge stuff we talked about, like an API call will actually let me see my license usage, right? Yeah, I mean, like even before we get to like the most sensitive
or
things
lack
that are true.
License. I wrote a Splunk search for a very large customer one time that identified unused licenses for software, and it saved that one search saved them $11 million a year.
And that's everywhere. So go back, Nate, to when we say like the agencies, they're being told at the federal level, reduce spend 70%. Like if you're not thinking about how to leverage an API economy and your existing solutions, like a shop that's using Splunk could write that search and save that exact same, their equivalent of the $11 million just by going, wait a minute, why am I spending all this money? Because the vendor's not going to show up and say, Jamie, I'd like to revert back to you $11 million of unused licenses. It's up to me as a CIO to go, where can I find? And I think that's why I get so frustrated sometimes around and why I'm so excited about what Doge is doing, because I think, again, the 70% reduction will also include increased revenue for the good actors. And those good actors are the ones that are right-sizing licenses. Those good actors are the ones that are automating. Those good actors are the ones that are doing all that kind of stuff. So I love where you're going. I want to take us real quick. I think we've done a pretty good job setting the stage. Now I want to talk about a CVE that was just discovered that made me think of y'all. I love it, Burch. But recording this right around the time of the Kubernetes breach and the CVE that was discovered. When I read that, hat tip to the team and our friends at Wiz who found this doing some research. But when I see Kubernetes CVE 9.8, my immediate question is, what happened on the API gateways? So Nate, I don't know if there's anything you want to touch on, but I think this is a really pragmatic example. I know I've kind of steered us a little bit more towards the modernization conversation up to now, which was kind of intentional because I knew we were coming here. Talk a little bit about, one, explain to our audience in a way they understand what Kubernetes is. Two, I'll just say it's everywhere across the public sector as an open source tool. And so three, what does that look like, Nate, when you read the news, you're a CISO today, you're a CIO today, you're a governor today, and you're like, I don't know what Kubernetes is, but 9.8 on a scale of 10 looks pretty bad and pretty severe. Tell me where it exists in my enterprise. How do we even get started? So Nate, I threw a lot at you. Let's start with, what is Kubernetes?
Yeah. So back in my day, when I was a systems administrator, we had physical servers. They were like, there were racks and there were cables, and those still exist. But then we took the next step and we virtualized those servers. And we like put multiple servers on a server, but we virtualized them. And then society took it a step further and containerized things. And so basically like all the code that's being executed or being run, or a lot of it, is actually being run in these containers. Now, if there is this giant need to orchestrate all of these containers. And so Kubernetes is a great way to be orchestrating all of these containers. But you can kind of think of it as like Kubernetes is the orchestrator in the symphony. If he or she gives the wrong symbol or does something wrong, everything is going to crumble. It's going to sound terrible. Everything's going to get messed up. So it's very important that your orchestrator for the symphony doesn't get compromised.
Fair to call it, like, I love the symphony dynamic specifically here. Fair to call it like a true hub with spokes, right? Like I have this hub that is the conductor that's got to make sure all these different spokes and containers of code are working together the way they should be working.
Yeah.
And if we were to not live in an API economy, then we would have to take all of those spokes and effectively centralize it in a kind of a closed stack where instead of being able to leverage the different containers, I would have to natively build and own the code for each of those spokes.
Yeah, and if I could take it a step further, like with this analogy, I like this. Let's say that conductor is looking at a music sheet and there's notes on there. What if someone could live change the notes before the conductor presents them? That's kind of what my understanding. This is hot off the press, this vulnerability, but insufficient sanitization of like API submitted data that's ingress allowed attackers to inject stuff and basically own the conductor.
Yeah. I love that one too. Fair to say that APIs are a foundational element of something like Kubernetes even being able to be the conductor, so that it's tough to have a hub and spoke strategy without APIs, if not impossible.
Right.
And then secondly, if I was able to get that physical key, to go back to where we were talking before, if the threat actor can masquerade as the conductor, right? Like there's two examples. There's the conductor getting manipulated because the conductor's getting bad data on the music sheet. There's also like the impersonation of the conductor showing up because they had the physical key and could get in.
There's by default, there's no identity with the key itself, with the string. Like Burch said earlier, it's just an API key. There's no identity by default. So how do you even know that's the real conductor up there?
That I love. Yeah.
So bringing it back to what actually happened, I'm like connecting the dots. I didn't read the article yet. So
this was this morning, guys. So time stamping where we are, like we were about to record for our audience and we started talking. This broke right before. So we're kind of giving you like unfiltered high level. But there's no two people I'd rather have having this conversation, aside from the Wiz researchers that found it, than Burch and Nate.
Yeah. So in a virtual key world, would this type of thing happen?
Yeah, actually, you get multi-defense mechanisms against an attack like this in a
Yeah,
virtual
like that
key
so
world.
let's
What
walk
is
through the
that?
multi-levels. Let's walk through the
Yeah.
multi-levels. Like if we were to design, if we looked backwards at what happened here to the extent we understand it, where are the redundant lines
Yeah.
of defense?
Okay, so my understanding of this vulnerability is with the admission controller. That's like the conductor. And with a carefully crafted API call, you can get it to do bad things. Now, in a virtual key world where the by the way, I think it's the default settings have this vulnerability. So if you're in the default settings, you're
Default
you're
at Kubernetes,
in trouble.
you're saying?
Yeah.
Right. The
Got it.
default in the admission controller.
Yep.
Now, even in a virtual key world, even if you're running these vulnerable default settings, what would happen is you would have policies built into your key, virtual key, that prevent against it. Let me give you some examples. IP restrictions. So with virtual keys, you can set the policy at the key level rather than in the code level. So I can say, hey, only API calls from these IP addresses should be allowed to proceed.
Yeah,
And
this
so that would
subnet
have,
or something.
yeah. So that would have stopped the attack. You can also set policies on what a virtual key is allowed to do. So which particular methods and endpoints, even what parameters. So that could have prevented it as well. But even better, you can. Oh, and this reminds me of a story. I'm going to tell the story real quick because it's related. I
was going to ask you for the story that you talked about earlier, if it's the same one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, it is. I remember when the RSA hack happened and we had these tokens. We used to have these physical things we'd carry around our neck, and we type in, it's our multi-factor authentication, the beginnings of multi-factor authentication. Well, there was a vulnerability, and the government notified us before it went public. And what we did was we crafted a Splunk search so we could look at the logs and see if that somebody was trying to exploit that vulnerability. If you virtualize keys, you can do the same thing. So you can look for that targeted, that well-crafted API call. You can search for that and alert on it in real time. So not only do you block it, but you also can identify the region of where the carefully crafted attack came from. So it's not only a block, but it allows you to like turn the defense into a little bit of an offense.
Burch, coming over to you to add commentary, I can't help but think about what you said earlier about like elevating to highest and best use. I like to think lawyers as a profession do one of the best jobs. Like the billable hour lawyer doesn't do anything that's not billable. Doctors do one of the worst jobs historically, right? Like they just don't delegate. They don't. If we think about it as technologists, innovators, solutions, what Nate's talking about that you talked about earlier, Burch, is like, if I have visibility, I can continue to kind of elevate up and play that offense and defense role. So I think where you kicked us off on that is really great. And I don't know if you have anything you want to add to kind of this or the macro of what it looks like for us to be kind of empowered to let machines work for us. Because I think those are the people that actually win in the future, right? The folks that are stuck in on-prem, fully remote work, they're putting a bullseye on their backs for automation to replace the task or the function. And so what does it look like for the critical thinker, the problem solver, to embrace where computers and machines are going, to say, how do I let that do as much of my administrative work as possible so that I can play at the strategic level, or I can play at the highest and best use of my background, experience, licensure, training, whatever that is.
Yeah, I mean, the part that really blows my mind is where the concept of virtual keys provides data that just didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And it's so critical, but it was just didn't exist. So now, sure, you virtualize one API key. Great. But as you add more and more, not only have you made everyone more efficient because they have a single interface to go to do these things, they can create as many virtual keys as, you could have one. You could have one for production, integration, dev. The data is huge because we can't even imagine what then becomes possible when you take that data and you feed it into AI. And now we can say, oh, this is abnormal behavior for this key. Or we take that data and coalesce it with security items. Or we take that data and we now have cost control, eliminating license. We're paying for this one service. No one's actually making any calls. So things like that, like the possibilities of ways that we can improve our lives becomes incredible once you have visibility.
Yeah. So I love and I love the kind of the parallel that just hit me is you're a property management company, right? And you have thousands of units, condos, apartments, houses. They're all unsecure right now. They're physical locks. And you realize that somebody has figured out the master lock, right? Well, your choice is I need to go get somebody to go change all of those different locks before the advent of, Ring and some of these innovations and, the virtualized keys, right? So the ability to say one to many, and I think maybe that's where I'd land this and kind of take us in. Nate, I want you to give a little bit of background. I know we've gone into a little bit. I'd love for our audience to kind of understand, what coming out of stealth means and kind of introduce where y'all are going and introduce Subkeys formally for a second. But if I was to kind of land, I think there's this philosophical choice as a CIO today or a technology executive today. Do you think it needs to be one to many, or do you think it needs to kind of be the inverse? And what I mean by that is the more as a CIO or as an executive that I could make the change in one place. It's why I think data governance is the other kind of like, if I was to say that virtualized APIs have a cousin or a brother or a sister, that's right there. It's like the public sector I have yet to uncover really meaningful, good data governance in the public sector. And so a lot of times when somebody shows up with a solution, it's like, hey, well, we have to go manually make that change at all of these different instances rather than a data governance solution that says like, hey, make it in the hub and the conductor can make sure that the spokes have that updated data. So I think when you think about the cost of sending out the locksmith to thousands of units for a property management company, the security vulnerability exists whether you admit it or not. So when we talk about numerators and denominators in this context, like the denominators is the total risk, known plus unknown. The numerator is just what you've known. And unfortunately, I think far too much of the public sector, for a lot of reasons, but optimistically, like getting a lot better pretty quickly, the numerator is a lot smaller than the denominator. And just because we don't know about the opportunity or the vulnerability doesn't mean that it does not exist. How do we help folks get the numerator to be a number that's a lot closer to the denominator? And I think APIs and certainly the management of virtual keys is like foundational to that.
I think all CIOs and CISOs would agree that the keys to the kingdom are literally the API keys.
We got another pun.
And ask yourselves, like, if those are the keys to the kingdom, how well are you protecting them?
Right.
How well are you watching them? Like, put controlling the keys aside for a moment. Like, what level of visibility do you have? There's a lot of technology or software out there that can like do network level inspection and stuff, but a lot of these keys are being used outside the walled garden. How do you know how your third-party APIs are being called?
Well, if I was to so I love that, and I think I totally agree. I also would take it bigger. Like, what does Zapier for government look like? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, what does Zapier for digital services look like? Because in my business all the time, I'm writing zaps that automate things that I could never build the core application, but I need these 6 things to play together for our team at RedLeif.
Right.
There is currently no Zapier for PubSec. And I believe, and I might be crazy, or I am crazy and I might be wrong here. I believe that APIs are the gateway. There's a pun for you on accident, Burch, but APIs are the gateway to Zapier for PubSec. So that a CIO could look at it and say like, hey, what do I need to automate? What exists and how can I know it's secure? I don't find many people in the PubSec even know what Zapier is. And it's like mind blowing to me that it's like, man, how are you running an enterprise and not know that. Again, the SIs probably don't want Zapier for PubSec, so there's a reason that communication doesn't really happen. But I think, Nate, to your point, it's like that the acceleration, you're one of the only innovations I've come across that's secure as much as it modernizes. Everything plays complementary, but I don't know that I've come across something as transformational. If we go from like the inception of cloud, then we start to see AI take off, all like those are just massive things. None of them are happening without an API.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I just urge people, like, even if you don't use our technology, like, find a way to virtualize your keys in the future. Like, it's the way to get visibility and control.
And I think if you start there, like, this is where it gets fun, right? Like, I should be, as a technology executive, asking myself, if I'm not virtualizing my keys and managing my keys in a centralized place, why? Like, what's the compelling reason not to?
I think in the future you might get in trouble for not virtualizing.
We have a lot of people we talk to who are using a password manager as the way to share keys, and they feel that is secure. And I respect your feelings, but I also say, great, I could still take one of those keys and use it, and you have no visibility.
That's right.
You don't know what is actually being used with those keys. You just have a place to store them.
Also, that password manager has a series of APIs it depends on, right? So like even the function of the password manager to authenticate is leveraging APIs.
Yeah. And rotating passwords is kind of a pain too. And I wanted to bring this back into like the workflow automation, the Zapier thing too. It's great that we can automate these things with Zapier, but unfortunately, sometimes the API providers force us to rotate keys. And that means everywhere we deployed workflow automation that use that key, we have to go update that.
Yep.
But imagine you virtualize the key. Now what you can do is update the underlying source key, but leave all the virtual keys wherever they are. So now you can, if a API vendor is forcing you to rotate a key, that doesn't mean you have to go and deploy new code anymore. You can if you want, but you don't.
I love it, right? Like the ability for the two-party handshake at the beginning to say, we want these two things to integrate, and then we want to rotate these numbers, this copy, this text, in a way that doesn't require either party to take action. When we talk about virtualizing,
but
like that,
you totally can if you want.
Right.
You can have a CI/CD pipeline that goes and rotates your virtual key, and you get the consistent way to do that. You're no longer dependent on, does the API provider have a way to rotate the key, and what is it? You don't have to rewrite that every time. You've got one way now. It's way easier to manage.
So we're going to show our audience what this looks like, and we're going to do something we don't often do. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah. The workflow automation, I think the next place that's going is that it's hype now, but like AI agents, and these AI agents are going to go do work for you, but they're going to hallucinate. They're going to do bad
100%.
things. And so I think organizations that have people experimenting with AI and AI agents, they should be asking themselves, like, what bad things could that thing do? And they should give virtual keys to those agents that are limited, so they can't delete or spend.
Yep.
And then 2, they absolutely need visibility to see what they're doing and maybe even what data their employees could be leaking.
I think AI agents are going to be kind of like what NIL plus the transfer portal were in college sports, in that without the right foundation laid, it was going to expose some really great stuff. So you're going to see some tax evasion cases where a 19-year-old had no idea that income tax was a thing, and they got a couple $1 million in like there's just this compliance and administrative nightmare around it, where the world loves to say, like, hey, we're buying a quarterback, or hey, we've got this NIL collective and we're doing those things. Same thing here with AI agents. I think you're going to watch some really unfortunate circumstances play out where the foundational data catalog, data governance, permissions work wasn't laid, where the API catalog doesn't exist, where I don't have any way to understand what my APIs are doing. One of my fundamental rules in building a team is everything scales. So bad communication at the 3-person level scales to 30 to 300, eventually becomes metastatic cancer. AI is going to accelerate explosively, and it's coming, it's here, it's a tidal wave. It's going to explosively accelerate transactions. The question is, what kind of framework do we have around it? How do we make sure it does the good and doesn't do the bad, to your point, Nate? And the ability to understand what APIs I have, the ability to securely manage those through those capabilities to accelerate the modernization, as I think we're going to see the winners win and really transform the public sector operation. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be people that skip some of what might seem like the boring and unsexy steps. I'm gonna land here. So we're gonna do something we never do on Ever to Conquer, and we're gonna actually do a quick little demo after the roundup. So we'll tease up for that. But I do want to leave here a true story on the API front that marries the public sector. So I had spent 2 or 3 years in the legislature thinking that my problem in getting an API catalog bill passed was my inability to just explain it better. And it was probably 2 years, I think, 2 legislative sessions. And I mean, I went recovering lawyer. I had floated it with some of the best mentors I had from a technical perspective. I had made it my number one priority. And so year one, it was maybe not a great product. And I thought, well, gosh, I need to go back to the whiteboard with my friends and go back to the whiteboard. And man, we drafted like the most beautiful model policy for a government to have an API catalog. And we thought, here we go. And I still couldn't get any traction. And then after that session, we went back to the metaphorical war room. And we were like, all right, they're never going to care about an API catalog. How do we make them care about an API catalog without knowing that they care about an API catalog? And that was the year that we introduced the digital credential, that there should be a valid, verifiable, and authenticated version of your Florida driver's license. It should not be single sourced to one company to just own the technical stack and rip the state off 1,000 different ways. It should have a credential service provider background to it that allows qualified entities to verify, validate, complete the transaction. The example I would use to get people to care about it, one of my nieces at the time was in college, and I said, look, if she wants to go to a grocery store and buy beer, I don't need the person at the cash register to know her full name and address. I just need them to get a yes, no, is that credential over the age of 21? Which, Nate, goes back to some of the Web3 stuff you were doing.
Yeah. You
But
know where I'm thinking
ultimately,
zero
I know.
knowledge proofs. Prove
I know.
something without revealing it. Yeah.
Right? Like the yes, no. And this is kind of those first conversations we had. But the reason I stress that is one of the things we really want to try and do is we bring the art of the possible to the table is like get people to understand we got to make the legislators care about it in a tangible way. And as soon as we made it about the digital credential, I never got another question about an API again. I could account for the privacy, the security, the modernization. But now I'm going and lobbying a 70-year-old in the legislature who's still on a flip phone, who happens to be a chairman of a committee. I can't even talk to him about Uber because he's never seen it. I can't talk to him about, Airbnb because he's never heard of it.
How do you explain the internet to someone who's never seen a computer?
Yeah.
You make me think, like, what if an adversary could look like your friend, but they got a key to your house?
Yeah.
That's what's happening right now.
100% happening. But we're not going to win that messaging sometimes. Security is the interesting thing, right? How do we present it to people in a way that says it is malpractice to allow your home, your kingdom, to be vulnerable to the crazy ex-girlfriend who still has a key, the threat actor that wants to break in, the burglar down the road, whatever that threat looks like? Why are we allowing them to replicate the keys where your kids sleep, where your wife or your spouse sleeps? Like, how do we?
There's actually a market for keys. Like, you can
For
go
sure.
and buy people's keys.
For sure.
You can very much decrease the value of those keys if you're rotating them quickly.
And our inaction as public sector leaders only strengthen that marketplace and increase the value of those keys.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to have some fun now. We do this at the end of every episode. We get into what we call the roundup. There's some fun questions. Y'all haven't seen them. We're going to give you both the opportunity to kind of rapid fire, kind of our version of a lightning round. But Burch, I'm going to start with you. I know. And bonus points every time you use a pun. But as the Prince of Puns, what is the one piece of advice that shaped your career the most, and who do you give it credit for?
First thing that comes to my mind is follow the fun. So early on, I was like really focused on like, how am I going to climb the ladder? And I realized I just want to be happy. And if I follow that, I end up doing really interesting things. that came from my background in improvisational comedy, where we say follow the funny. So I don't have a specific person to attribute it to, but
I love that you went there. I didn't bring up the improv earlier, and that's a mistake on my behalf. Like I think we could have a lot of fun on that when we have you back one day. Mad respect for people that can pull that off. Nate, what about you? Best piece of advice, and who do you give credits for?
I don't know how to follow that up.
You're sweet.
I want the next question. I can't.
All right,
follow
the next
that.
question. The next question. This I feel like is up your alley. If you have one kind of secret weapon for productivity, one practice, one thing that when you're in rhythm, you're doing this thing really well, or this thing helps you get into rhythm, that one practice that either helps you get locked in or keeps you locked in, what is it?
Oh man, I mean, remove distractions is the first thing that comes to mind. But honestly, I am like most productive when I'm very interested in the thing that it is. So I have to find a way to make it interesting, and you'll get productive on it. You'll just want to be working on that thing more than the other things.
Love it. Burch, do you have a practice or a framework that you would say either gets you or keeps you locked in?
Yeah, well, there's two things. Nate's spot on. If you don't care about what you're doing, then it's not going to be very good, and you're not going to be having fun. One of the things I did early on in my career is I realized I don't like to think that often. So how can I make it so I don't really have to think? And when I used to be a WebSphere engineer. When I used to have to update settings for security things on 20 different cells, I'm not I start out, I'm going cell by cell, web interface, and then I'm like, screw this. Just open up all the tabs, have them all on the same window, and then click Alt Tab, click Alt Tab, click Alt Tab. And so I just do one task and then save. So I guess it's like I accelerated the pace that I got the work done, and really just got to listen to music because I didn't really have to think much.
Yeah, there's ways to make stuff fun. Sometimes you have to be creative, but for me, when I had to pick up my Legos, I hated picking up my room or my Legos. What I would do is I would set a stopwatch and see how fast could we do it. But I've got one even better. I recently was at this conference and they talked about how they have this. They just use Google Home or some AI, and they have chores for their kids. And every morning, what they do is the kids ask for their chores, but it does something different each day. It'll say, clean your room and act as if you were a Roman soldier.
Oh, I love it.
And so the kids are looking forward to getting up and seeing what their chore is that day, because there's some new way to do it. So nobody likes doing chores, but there's ways to make stuff fun where you are productive because you're interested.
I'm 100% doing that.
I feel like I can do this to myself, right?
Yeah.
I get to be a Roman gladiator while I'm cleaning my condo.
I think, in a way, we're all a bit of a Roman gladiator.
Yeah.
All the time.
We're all kids and we're all gladiators, right?
Yeah.
All right. If you're going to totally unplug, right? I have some things that worst day, best day, doesn't matter. My brain shuts off. If you're going to do something to kind of totally unplug mentally where everything is good, what is that thing? Starting with you, Burch.
Do you mean completely remove myself from work? That kind of thing?
Not work. This is I got to step away. I need kind of a sabbatical, a refresh, clear my head.
So sadly, I don't get to do this anymore. But one of the things that I did for many years is I would take a week or two of my vacation and in the summer go work at my old summer camp.
Oh.
And, just being around kids and being goofy and not having to dress up and go into an office, not even touching a computer. It was the complete opposite. And that was always a nice sabbatical.
Reset. Yeah, for sure. What about you, Nate? If you're taking a sabbatical, what are you doing?
50 miles offshore in the Gulf, fishing with music and absolutely no cell phone reception.
Love it. Love it. All right, you each get to pick one book and one band that you're convinced the world needs to know about and might not know about.
I'll go with the book. You do the band. Or, I don't,
Yeah.
No,
Fire away, Nate.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. So the book, The Sovereign Individual, is an interesting one.
Okay.
I do my most recommended book though is Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. It'll help you solve problems and have fun doing them and just enjoy life.
All right, Burch, if you want to do both, fire away.
Yeah, I think it's called The Goal,
Okay.
and I think the author's name is like Israeli. It's odd. It was about process automation, but somehow it's really exciting, and it like blows your mind on like how you organize your life,
Yeah.
including work and not work. Oh, and then the band is obviously the Presidents of the United States of America.
Love it. All right. We got two left, and we leave with the last one, then we'll get to the demo. You get to pick them here. Burch, we're starting with you. Nate, I'm gonna save you from this one. We're gonna you can jump in if you want to. Burch,
I'll
you get to
take the
pick 'em.
bullet.
This is true improv. You get to pick them.
Okay.
The pick them is the wildest thing you've ever done to impress somebody. Personal life, professional life, like you were just really trying to figure out how to impress, and did it work? Or what is your hottest, most controversial take that you don't think should be hot or controversial?
I'm going to go with the latter because
Okay.
an idea came right to me.
Yeah.
I think the entire world should not have time zones. I think we should just agree on like logically it would be GMT would just become 0
Yeah.
and everyone now is at 0.
Yeah.
And we, thanks to technology, will be able to know when people are awake or not.
Yep.
You know, different features on our devices. But essentially, we no longer have to convert time zones. When we go to schedule things, we can, just see, oh, they're sleeping at that time. But everyone tells me,
You're the first one to pick that, and I'm not sure anybody can top that because that should not be a hot take. Like calendar integration, the ability to go like open hours.
you know what's funny? People get really upset and they're like, what? So I'm going to sleep at like 2 a.m.?
Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares? No,
And
this
also,
is a
there's
great
no
one, Bert.
there's no AM or PM. It's now 24 hour.
It's open or closed.
If we could do that and move to the metric system across the world,
There's only 2 countries left. It's us and like America Samoa or something.
All right, so Nate's hot take is move to metric. Burch's is GMT. I love it. All right. We ask every guest to leave a question for the next guest. So our next guest might get 2, depending on if that's a single episode or not. But first, you both get to answer a question from the CEO of Pursuit, Mike Visich, who left us a great one.
Mm-hmm.
What is the most significant or consequential 180 you've done in your life? Business, prefer, like any but like something that you had kind of a conviction or practice about that was the most significant or consequential 180 that you changed operationally. Could be in your marriage, could be with your kids, could be at work, but it's something that you did a 180 on that mattered.
Going to college is a really great opportunity to start fresh.
Yeah.
And I know this may come as a surprise, but I wasn't the coolest kid in high school. So, I think going to college was almost like a 180 because it was a palate cleanser. Like I'm starting from 0. No one knows that I wet my pants in, 5th grade. No, well, now everyone knows. But, and it's, it was also actually for me the time when I fully embraced the name Burch, which is not my legal name.
Yeah.
And felt like that was an identity that better represented who I am and how I want to be perceived than my legal name was.
That's
and
a really
so
cool
that
180
was like
though.
a 180, I guess.
That's a big one. That's like spot on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nate, do you have anything you want to add?
yeah, this took me a lot of thinking. It's a very good question, but it's really get comfortable doing the uncomfortable thing. And what I mean by that is it's kind of related to what Birch did. I had to move around a lot when I was growing up, and it was hard because you're not the one that has the friends when you get somewhere. But the uncomfortable thing is to go and just get in the group, let them make fun of you at first because you're the outsider, but then you're going to actually find the true friends that you like.
Yeah.
This in my career, constantly, like, I have a comfortable job. Do I want to do the uncomfortable thing and move my family to San Francisco? Well, that was actually one of the best career thing I could have done. Was a little bit of uncomfortable. All my friends and parents were advising me, "You've got a great job. Just keep doing the comfortable thing." But it's really where the life experiences come from, doing the uncomfortable things that you know are positive.
I love that answer. As y'all are thinking about your one question you want to leave for the next guest, we have an obsession with vulnerability and depth here. And I think like that authenticity of dialogue around the ecosystem is what it takes to have some uncomfortable conversations, to do some uncomfortable things. I don't know of any sort of innovation or growth, personal, technological, that doesn't begin with a lot of acute uncomfortability. And I
Starting
love
a company is very uncomfortable, by the way.
Well,
Preach, brother.
changing a job when you're content with your current one,
Preach.
or even
Yeah.
when you're not. You know, I said I follow the fun in my career, but that also meant like creating these very odd new teams
Yeah.
for which I was like, this might be a complete failure.
Yep. No, I love it. All right. What question do y'all want to leave for our next guest?
What's something that you regret doing in your business experience,
Love
in your
it.
business life, and what did you learn from it to not do that again?
I love it. Nate, what do you want to leave? I'll buy you time while you're thinking about it, because this came up last week when I was in DC, but former co-founder of ours is now the administrator of Doge, and we like to laugh, but we were sitting at a dinner table and she made a joke. A bunch of people who didn't know her, who didn't know the joke and hadn't met her, and she made a joke. I wasted probably 600 grand of just time and waste because I was so young in my career, and I believe that GUI and design did matter, but like hyper obsessed over it. And that was mine from a business perspective. Like, I learned to appreciate the back end and understand that the foundation has to be built before we ever care about, while it does matter, the furniture we pick and the paint colors, like the core infrastructure of the thing, literal or metaphorical. I learned that lesson the hard way, and she liked to remind the entire dinner table of how bad that was. So I appreciated that
cool.
one, Amy.
I'm going to add on to Birch's question. So you can make it one question,
Yep.
two-parter.
Perfect.
And it's going to be, what will you regret in the future if you don't try from a business perspective?
I like it.
That's a great
That feels like a separate question. It's themed. We're in
It's
the same
two-part.
theme.
Yeah. It's what did you do that you do regret, and what are you not doing that you will regret if you don't do?
Yeah.
All right, we're going to do something that we have never done on this podcast, and that we honestly may never again do on this podcast. Because when we say we want this to be an environment that is truly non-sales, that's not pushing product, that brings people from all sides of the ecosystem, we want to be really, really careful about that. And just like every rule has some exceptions, and they may be limited, this is one of those. So, Nate, I want to get into a quick demo that shows people what a virtualized API can look like. So, stipulating, as you said earlier, like, regardless of what platform people use, if there's even anybody else doing what y'all are doing, at a bare minimum, I want our audience to be introduced to a virtual API key and put some context to what we talked about, to see the art of the possible. We will do the art of the possible on this podcast. We will not do sales and distribution and product pushing. And so I love what you're doing and where you're going for all the reasons we talked about. But Nate, can you give our audience just a few minute demonstration of, like, where the caveman met fire and now the technology executive meets the virtualized API key? What does that actually look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's do it. We'll get right into it. So what you're about to see is how simple it is to create a virtual API key. Then we're going to see one used in action, and how you can virtualize any a third-party API and have one place to consume it, all of third-party APIs. See if you notice the moment when an adversary gets a hold of a key that they shouldn't have and does something inappropriate.
This is live fire, right? Like this is not. This is live environment for people.
This is live. Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna make actually, Jamie, we're gonna make a key for you. Boom. We just made a virtual key for weather.gov for Jamie. No requirement on weather.gov or any other API to implement anything for us. You can create virtual keys for any API. So I'm gonna go over and grab Jamie's key here, and I'm gonna send it to you in this chat, Jamie, so you can run this at home. I'll run it, and actually, let's limit this key too. So I'm gonna take Jamie's key, and I'm gonna say, you know what? I don't really trust Jamie.
I don't trust Jamie 100. I trust him 1. Whatever that unit means.
Yeah. So maybe this API has a cost associated. It's an AI API or something. I also don't want Jamie to take down the infrastructure by running too many. But so we just limited his API key. I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna run it, and boom.
And
we
Nate,
got
real
the
quick,
weather.
if I can jump in while that script's running, you limited the number of transactions, is what you did there.
I said that this API, this particular virtual key, Jamie's, is only allowed to run once per minute.
Got it.
And so if Jamie were to run it again, it's not gonna work.
Yep.
So it's that simple to create a key and set limitations on it. And you can set all sorts of these policies like GeoIP restriction, and you can provide a defense in depth for your API keys and put policies at the key level, not the code level.
Love it.
And so it worked. And we get full visibility now into every single API request. So here we can see I ran a request from him in Tallahassee right now. And then, hey, wait a second. Somebody used Jamie's key in White Plains.
I don't know where White Plains is. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina.
Oh, there's somebody else on this call who got access to that key that I dropped. And
I feel like he might have improvised. I'm not pointing
Nice.
fingers at Burch.
Whoa.
Yeah. And just think about that for a second. If this key wasn't virtualized and I shared it, how would I, as the consumer of this API, easily be able to see that it's now being utilized by someone else in some other location? I might want to set further restrictions on this.
So you wouldn't, and I want to double click for a second on for people to understand both the metaphorical and what happened. Is it fair for me to assume that Burch grabbed the key from the chat?
Yes.
Is
that's
that
exactly
okay?
what
So
happened.
so now let's imagine, instead of us in a Riverside studio where there's a chat function and there's multiple parties, we actually have multiple applications around my enterprise. Like, I think you just laid a beautiful metaphor in and of itself, whether intentional or not, that somebody else was able to access the chat, copy the key, and then act as if they were me.
Yep.
And it's happening every day.
But now you see that it's happening.
Right. Now I have a chance. It's,
And you can take action. I just rotated the key. I could disable it. If it was a contractor, I could set an expiration. You get control of all of your keys now.
Man, I'm glad that we got to do this when nobody knew who you were. Like, there's just so many. I mean, the number of use cases, I've said a lot of times, and I said it kind of unfiltered. I think it was at one of my first NASIOs. They were like, what is it like to be the CIO of Florida? I said, it's like being Helen Keller trying to play quarterback. Like, you can't see anything, you can't hear anybody, you can't talk to anything, and everybody wants you to put points on the board. I hope some of the folks that are catching the episode are take us to the API connections, Nate. I don't want to interrupt, but man, I just
want to
seeing
point out,
it in
like,
action is just
Yeah.
like you're about to become. I've told you privately, and I'll say it publicly. I think you're a unicorn in the making with what you're doing. Like, it is. This is about to be the industry norm.
It will seem foolish that we ever used real API keys, because that's just exposing yourself to pain. And I just want to point out that you can do this for any API. So if we wanted to if you have custom API, you can do that. But let's say you want to get control and visibility of your AI APIs. You simply select the API you want. You go over to the API's vendor's website, just get a key. And when you put it in,
Can you
can
show
start
that key? Take the visibility off for a second.
Oh,
Nate,
yeah.
real quick, because we've got folks who have not seen an API key before. Thanks.
Yeah. So This API key, we just exposed our company's Anthropic API key to the world. Like, this is kind of dangerous. This is real. And if I don't clean this up, somebody could do something bad. And so this is what I mean. Never share these API keys.
What was the, I'm drawing a blank, Burch, I feel like you can tell me, who was the guy that put his social security number on like the identity protection company?
Yeah, he bought like
He bought like crazy
Simply
insurance
Safe or
because he
something.
didn't, yeah.
Yeah, and then he had the car driving around showing his social security number.
Yeah. But Nate, to your point, like that's a really important thing for people to understand. Like you just showed an API between Subkeys and Anthropic that if you didn't come in and remediate, somebody could take that and
Right.
Yeah, I
exactly
mean,
send their use.
this is Anthropic, but what if we were setting up the one for Salesforce and now all your
Salesforce, the bank
customer
account,
info,
like go down,
healthcare?
payroll.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of these systems where
I think
It's-
it's just for people to understand, like a copy and a paste of an API key lets you charade and act as if you are Nate, or whoever.
Yeah, and check this out. So I created a few keys, and let's say I shared a key with Jamie, Burch, you logged in, got your key, and we also have an external vendor who we want to have access to our third-party service, in this case, OpenAI. Since that, they all have their own keys, and since that Anthropic key is now exposed, I am in danger of somebody messing stuff up. So
Yep.
what would normally happen is I have to go create new keys and give them to all these different people. Well, watch this. I'm simply going to go over to OpenAI. Let's pretend I delete that one. I'm going to create a new key.
this is the equivalent of rotating, right?
So I created a new key from Anthropic, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go update it here. So what I just did is I made it so I updated the exposed underlying key, and I don't have to go give new keys to all of my users, developers, external vendor. This vendor can run the same command they ran a second ago, and it just continues working. And we didn't have to go and redo all that work.
So it's almost like you get the sometimes the provider has a rotation policy, like every 60 days or whatever, but your company may have a different rotation policy. So having the virtualization also helps you support that.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things I kind of gave the disclaimer a little bit when we were doing something we've never done and don't plan on doing again. Like, there's lots of people with better mousetraps. You've kind of invented a mousetrap, right? Like you've gone from to Nate, to your point. Like, why would we ever have used physical keys if we had other options? So anything else you want to leave us with that just would demonstrate? I mean, like, I love the tiles in the list of like, hey, you're kind of showing me Zapier for PubSec, right? Like, how do I manage all of the APIs in my enterprise and kind of know at least the numerator number of APIs and where they are, that gets me closer to the denominator. And then B, makes it really easy to manage them in one place.
Exactly. That endpoint is actually pretty important. It's like now every API out there is like a snowflake. There's a different way to create keys, and there's different scopes available, and there's different features like rate limiting. But once you virtualize the API keys, you get one place that's consistent to consume the APIs in the same fashion. So you can rotate and restrict and give visibility, send to your favorite logging system without being dependent on what the API provider.
I'll go so far as to say this. I think the people who see this kind of today that are interested are technology executives. I think the people tomorrow, the general counsels of the world and the procurement shops of the world that are writing the RFQs, that are looking at the specifications and standards. Like, if I was still on the inside, I can't fathom not requiring a minimum capability that virtualized keys exist, so that I know if I'm deploying a third-party solution that they're using virtualized keys in their own infrastructure, and B, that they're delivering me the ability to leverage virtualize as well. Like, that's not a Subkeys specific thing. Even if the Subkeys can do it, it's kind of a minimum standard that we kind of get to. Like, not virtualizing keys kind of becomes malpractice pretty quickly, to the point that the general counsels and the privacy officers and the procurement shops are like, hey, how can we account for the security the minimum standards of the respondents, the capabilities to make sure we're getting best value as the buyer, and also accelerating the way to move. So, man, I appreciate you taking. I don't want to cut you off. Is there something else you want to show?
I was just going to comment on that. Like I was going to pull up the EU AI Act that's going into effect later this year is going to require that you have some of the ability to prove that certain API requests happened or didn't happen.
Nate, we've gotten along so well, and this has been so great. And you just did something I don't think anybody who knows me could possibly fathom happening. I got to give a little applause to the EU on public policy, and I didn't know that day would ever come with some of what they've done on data privacy. But this is an example of what I would stress, like, there's a whole regulatory conversation around what y'all are doing here and privacy and security that doesn't require the heavy stick and limitations of access to the marketplace by overbearing regulation, and instead says, hey, here's the minimum standards to enter the marketplace. And if you can do that, go forth and conquer. Jokes aside, it's like, I don't know that I'd ever give California or with GDPR, like you look at the data privacy coming out of the EU and data privacy coming out of California, sometimes it seems to be counterproductive. But when you start talking about validating those minimum standards and saying, like, as long as you can do this, go compete in the marketplace, I couldn't applaud that framework more. All right. Well, we have done something that I never planned on doing on this show. I'm really glad we did it because I think you just introduced something to this ecosystem that has a significant need to understand what APIs are, where they exist, why they matter, how they're a security risk, and then how they can kind of get their hands around it and understand, like, look, I can in fact transform the digital services that my constituents are consuming, and increasingly more frustrated with the public sector applications that are out there, poorly designed and just long times to complete the transaction while simultaneously accounting for the security. And so, every now and then better, faster, and cheaper are possible. And I love the way that you just showed that. All right, Nate, Burch, thank you for coming to see us, spending some time here today with us at the Ever to Conquer. Nate, before we leave, and we'll have information in the show notes, but if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about the work y'all are doing, what's the easiest way to follow up and contact you?
Yeah. You can find out more at subkeys.io. You can email us at contact@subkeys.io. We're also on LinkedIn and X. We have a community Discord. We're friendly. Don't be afraid to reach out. And we're actually opening up signups for free for a little while. So if anybody wants to give it a spin, it's totally free to try it out. And we'll end up waitlisting at some point.
Awesome. So we'll put that information in the show notes and help point folks there. I love what you're doing on kind of the proof of concept model. So I'd love to kind of jam out with you on that, because I think I have a feeling there's a lot of people listening to this show that would be really interested in running those experiments to understand the art of the possible. So I'm happy to help on that. But folks, do me a favor and just go do some homework on Nate and Burch and the work they're doing, because it's great work, whether it's the right fit for your organization or not. It is the wave of the future when we think about what APIs do and today and what they look like tomorrow. So Nate, Burch, thanks a ton. And we hope you'll come back and see us again as you take off like a rocket ship that I have no doubt you will.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.